webinar that we're running with the Russo-British Chambers of Commerce. Staffordshire Chamber of Commerce has had quite a good relationship over the last few years. We've dealt with Sergey quite a lot. He's been up to our neck of the woods and done a few presentations for, which have been always very well reserved. So I'm genuinely not going to steal Alf's thunder today by going on about the Russian economy and how much we trade with Russia and how much more we probably could trade with Russia. So this is just a very brief introduction to Alf, who I believe has been the executive director at the Russo-British Chambers of Commerce since about 2017, following what looks like a very interesting history, serving in the military and then living and working overseas. So thanks ever so much again for joining us. And without further ado, I'd just like to pass over to Alf Torrance. But before we do say that, this video is being recorded, so hopefully we'll be able to get it onto our Chambers of Commerce website in Staffordshire and possibly on the Russo-British Chambers of Commerce as well. And we will certainly be sending it out in news bulletins and everything for the people that can't join us. So thanks very much again, and over to Alf.
Great. Rob, well, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. Delighted to be here this afternoon. It's 2 o'clock in Moscow. I appreciate it's only midday in your lunch break or whatever you're up to at the moment back in the UK. But as you said, we've been building on this relationship with the Staffordshire Chambers of Commerce and absolutely delighted to be able to do this presentation today. We represent companies from both Russia and the UK, and in the UK we have a few members from the Staffordshire area, and I've noticed one of them present on today's webinar. And of course it's one of probably the most iconic of UK brands, JCB, who have a very strong presence in Russia and with whom we have a great working relationship. So I'm delighted that Nick Grills is joining us as well. Apart from JCB, we have some other members, so it's an area well known to us. What I'd like to do today is give you an overview of the markets in Russia, looking at some of the reasons why British companies should be looking at Russia as an investment destination. I'll go through some stats about the commercial relationship. You'll have read some of them in the papers, but it's good to get an up-to-date readout on them, and have a look at what goods and services do well in Russia. Any export market has its challenges, and I will also look at some of those which present to companies looking at Russia in particular. Before I do that, if I may, I'd just like to say a few words about the Chamber. We are a bilateral, non-political membership organization. We've got offices in London and Moscow. And at the current time, I am in Moscow. Traditionally, the executive director has been in London, but as of January, I relocated to Moscow. I wasn't planning on staying quite as long as I have been, but I think we're all we're all facing that issue at the moment. As I said, we're a membership organization. We are well represented by big corporate firms. I've mentioned JCB. BP is a very strong member and supporter of the Chamber. But I think, like a lot of chambers, our core membership is really the SMEs, and they are I'd say the focus of most of our activity. The bigger firms have their own means of reaching the market and need us less. I think we're no different to anyone else in that respect. And we really focus on helping SMEs break into Russia and vice versa, because we are a bilateral organization, so we do represent both camps. We have quite an old history. We were formed in 1916, and our mission from that date has been to promote trade between Russia and the UK. I've always loved the idea of the Chamber being set up in 1916. Most of you will know it was a year before the Russian Revolution, and I just love the idea of British and Russian businessmen getting together and thinking, this is a good time to do a really sort of adventurous joint venture just before the system collapsed. But I suppose no one has a crystal ball, as COVID-19 has shown us. So these black swans can come from nowhere, or do come from nowhere, I should say. I said we promote trade between Russia and the UK. As I'll come on to, it has been a slightly prickly relationship. And one thing we always ensure is that we have the support of both governments in what we do. So myself and my chairman, we regularly speak to Russian government and the British government just to make sure that they are supporting the mission. And I have to say, from those very, very early days, over 100 years, we have always had the support of both governments, which I think comes to a surprise to many when they think of some of the ups and downs that relationship has had. Anyways, we're here 104 years later and still going strong. Okay, let me just... Why Russia? A good question. If you're, I see by some of the names, obviously some of you have a Russia background, but for those who don't, and if you're based in the UK, that is a good question. There is a lot of negative press out there in the UK about the political relationship with Russia. We all know about the sanctions which were put in place. Oligarchs, sort of are the daily grist of the red tops. There's question of economic uncertainty, most recently the oil price. So all these questions, if you're looking at Russia as an export market, you might sort of, it might raise the question marks. However, if you can think back to the pre-COVID-19 time, which seems a million years ago now, but the government's focus has been very much on encouraging UK business to look at markets outside of Europe. And it's very much the Department of International Trade's mission to do so. And we're in almost daily conversation with DIT, and the sense we get is that there will be a big government push to encourage this as soon as we're out of this crisis. And of course, Russia is an extremely exciting, challenging, but extremely exciting market that can't be ignored. And why is that? Well, we all know from our basic geography lessons that Russia is the biggest country on earth by pardon the pun, a country mile. It's also got the largest population in Europe as a single country. Obviously, the European Union bloc is bigger, but with 150 odd million inhabitants, it's the biggest single market. What people can overlook if they haven't dealt with Russia is the extremely well developed infrastructure, which makes business easier than a lot of people might expect. They're a leader in 5G. If you visit Moscow, and I'm not sure how many of you have, but you'll be very pleasantly surprised. Metro or taking the tube in Moscow and not having Wi-Fi is very much the exception rather than the rule, unlike in London where Wi-Fi is just coming online. Some of you may know from your history books that Russia and in the past the Soviet Union always prided itself on its mathematical and scientific prowess. That's very much still the case, and how that manifests itself is in a very well educated and capable workforce. Russians, by and large, and of course these are all to a certain extent generalizations, but within those generalizations there's always a kernel of truth. Russians aren't savers for historical reasons, and therefore the average Russian household has got a high level of disposable income. And also they're very sophisticated consumers. They like quality brands. And fortunately for UK companies, Russians view UK British goods as high quality, desirable goods to buy. So in that sense, we have quite an advantage. Okay, let's move on. I would be remiss to not mention COVID-19. you know, if it hadn't happened, I obviously wouldn't mention it, but I've had to amend my presentation to take it into account. And I'd just like to say a few words on the situation in Russia, because again, I'm not sure what you're reading in the British press, but the little I've read of it from the UK perspective, again, I think like the press does for everyone, accentuates the negative rather than the positive. So I'll just say a few words on that. You will have read there's been a big increase in numbers of cases in Russia. However, I mean, that, if you're a mathematician, is actually completely logical. Russia has not reached peak, and therefore there's going to be a continual day-on-day increase until the peak is reached, which partly explains the numbers. Also, Russia has had a very effective and far-reaching regime of testing far earlier than many European countries. And as we've learnt from other countries, that the more you test, obviously the more cases you find. But what the papers tend not to report is by testing that you can then isolate. And as a result, Russia has had far fewer deaths than most European countries. In fact, far less than UK. And I think Germany, which is held up as one of the sort of success stories in this respect, I think they've got about between 8,000 and 9,000 deaths. Russia's under 2,000. So in that regard, it is far and away ahead of the west of Europe. In terms of measures, they're quite similar to what's happening in the UK. Obviously, I've got all my family back in the UK. The main difference, I think, for us in Russia at the moment is we're not allowed to exercise unless you have a dog. I've been looking for one, but no one's selling at the moment. So if you have a dog, you can take it out for 150 meters from your house, whereas I know in the UK you're allowed to go for a run, etc. Also in Russia, certainly in Moscow, if you want to go into work, you need to get a digital pass, and you apply for that online. Very, very organized, but that is another big difference. Saying all that, post-crisis, I mean, obviously, the COVID-19 thing has been terrible for everyone. We're all in the same boat. Certain sectors have been far worse hit than others. We have a lot of hotels who are members, and obviously the tourist trade is one of those sectors which has taken a terrible hit on that. Post-crisis, however, you know, as a chamber, I think all chambers do it. Part of the mission is to be optimistic and look for the opportunities where they lie. But post-crisis, I do think there will be an opportunity in the Russo-British trade relationship. We talked about the government encouraging business to look outside of the EU, but Russia, as a producer, has been able to sell abroad with relative advantage because the ruble has taken such a hit with the oil price. And whereas most people or most businesses will look at Russia purely as an export market, what part of our strategy will be is to encourage a British business to actually look at it as a production center and actually somewhere that it can export from, with all the advantages that, well, I've touched upon, and I'll go into more detail in a minute, i.e. very well trained workforce, obviously a weak currency, which helps exports from Russia. Good, moving on. So that's all I'll say on COVID-19. I just thought it important to mention it, because obviously if we're just talking about the trade relationship without mentioning COVID-19, then it tends to be a little bit unrealistic and a little bit over-optimistic. Today's Russia. Again, I apologize to all those who know Russia well or who have Russian roots, but for those who don't, who are Brits and just looking at Russia for the first time perhaps and haven't been there, what always strikes me is how many of the old preconceptions about Russia still exist. It's the same old story, the Wild East, you know, even the old James Bond Mission Impossible scenario, still very, very sort of prevalent in people's consciousness. Obviously, the reality is nothing like that. And anyone who had the good fortune of getting out there for the World Cup will have very much seen that. And I hope some of you did. But I mean, if you live in Moscow, you know, it is like London. It's a vibrant, dynamic capital. You know, there's no better way of describing it. It is super modern. I lived here back in the early 2000s, and then I had a gap of about 12 years where I didn't come back. And the sort of difference in living in Moscow, has been really striking. They've had a change of mayor, and the new mayor has very much taken on board the concept of smart cities. The traffic is still an issue, but they're trying to improve the traffic, building new metro lines, new roads, new traffic control systems. It's just become a much, much more pleasant, livable city. As I mentioned before, 5G, it's a leader in that technology, and Moscow is one of the cities that is rolling it. It's one of the first cities to roll it out. So if you've got, you know, if you're considering Russia as a market, and Moscow is, you know, is the most obvious entry point to the market, you know, throw all those preconceptions away, and the very best way is just to get on a plane, come out, and you will be totally taken aback from the reality. And that's one of the biggest pleasures of my job, is like a lot of other chambers of commerce, we do trade missions, and actually getting people who haven't been to Russia onto the plane into Russia is fantastic, because their preconception and the reality, there's just such a huge mismatch. Okay, a few more specifics on why you should consider Russia, or Russia should be on your list of potential export destinations. I've talked a lot about Moscow. I mean, like any capital city, it is very important in a very similar way to London. And just as an aside, you know, like many businesses, we've become very London-centric. However, one of our missions is actually to encourage trade between regions. So when we do our trade missions, we specifically try and get outside of the capital cities. But in any, as I said, Russia is not just Moscow and not just St. Petersburg. There are over 15 cities with populations of over 1 million. And again, all with vibrant economies, looking to do trade with other countries. I mentioned before, a substantial middle class, not savers, so with sizable disposable income, and very much on the lookout for quality brands, very sophisticated, and they recognize quality. And as I mentioned before, we're very fortunate that the UK is very much associated with quality brands. Of course, Russia's not part of the EU. It is part of the WTO, so it has all those trade agreements and that structure in place to protect businesses. And for UK companies, although this sounds out of date, I say it for a reason, and that is Russia was the fastest growing export market between 2010 and 2013. That sounds a long time ago, but of course, in the intervening years, we had the Crimea issue and the imposition of sanctions, which obviously put a big hit on the export relationship or the trading relationship. The fundamentals of that relationship are still there. So once we get over, once things evolve a little bit longer, all the reasons why it was such a popular export market are still there and still can be exploited or taken advantage of. Historical ties, again, something that tends to get overlooked. We've got a very, very long trading history with Russia. In fact, for any of the history buffs out there, Russia, UK and Russia were the first European trading partners to do bilateral business together. And I think the first ever joint stock company on record was a British company formed to trade with Moscow back in the 16th century. So we have history in this, and again, not what you read in the papers, but when we travel out in the regions, I'm always struck by the goodwill that is there for someone representing British brands. What else can I say? There is a huge amount of experience and expertise out there. There are many, I'll come on to it in a minute, but there's lots of organizations that exist purely to support businesses doing business with Russia. And I will tell you, I suspect this fact will surprise you, that there are over 4,000 UK VAT registered companies doing business with Russia at the moment. So probably a lot more than you thought. We estimate companies with an actual physical presence in Russia probably number around 300. Always, as always, difficult to tell when you come to the ownership issues, etc. But a lot. And of course, London, very much a very popular place for Russian companies to list. And I think at last count, there are about 60 Russian companies on the FTSE stock market, listed on the FTSE stock market. Okay, moving on. Just a few facts and figures. I hope you can see that. This, again, I've just put this up here to break some of those preconceptions. This is looking at the value of the trading relationships between countries, obviously Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And if you can see, only up to 2018, Russia is in green, South Africa in purple. So if you see, and again, before I started this job, when I saw these stats for the first time, it always surprised me, given our very long historical and Commonwealth association with South Africa, that actually we have a bigger trading relationship with Russia than we do with South Africa. Brazil obviously is more logical to me. And then India, obviously India is a slightly bigger relationship, but if you look at the figures, not a huge amount more. Okay. This is an aggregation of goods and services of that relationship. The goods are in purple, and the services are in lighter blue. Again, on the bottom, on the x-axis there, you've got the years, which I hope you can see, and you can see various historical events being reflected on that chart. We've got the sort of global economic crash, 2008, 2009, causing a huge dip in the volume of exports. And then obviously the sanctions in 2013, 2014, having a big impact on exports. Interesting to note that services never affected in the same way. They've continued to more or less creep upwards. And given that we're a service economy, that is good news, obviously. When I'm asked why that is, I suppose the most obvious reason is that services tend not to need such a sort of heavy physical presence in a country. They're more difficult to legislate for with respect to sanctions, and hence they've been affected much less than goods. The relationship itself is worth around £12 billion a year bilaterally. What these charts don't talk about is the foreign direct investment, and those that relationship has, I haven't got a chart for it, but has not been much affected by the sanctions. Okay, having a look at some of the sectors, and then some of the drill down into that to have a look at what does well. Obviously, sports infrastructure has been massive in Russia over the last few years. World Cup, I mentioned earlier. Hopefully some of you got out here for that, but that was a great opportunity for British companies, many of which took advantage of it. Natural resources goes without saying. Obviously, that tends to be imports from the UK, but obviously to support that industry, Russia needs outside assistance or uses outside assistance, and that's where UK companies are involved as well. Out of interest, I think BP is the biggest single investor or foreign investor in Russia globally. So we have, UK is well represented in that respect. Mentioned Russia being such a huge company. Obviously, that requires a whole system of transport, warehousing, logistics, etc., etc. And again, just in our membership, we're very well represented in those sectors, and many of them doing very well. Retail, we've talked about goods. Again, many British brands represented. I'm thinking of Barber, Hamleys, Garrard's, Mothercare, all the high street names that you see in the UK tend to have representation out here. And then, of course, innovation. I've talked about Russia's emphasis and tradition in the sciences. That manifests itself in high-tech innovation. We've developed a few strategic partnerships with various Russian foundations. One, which you may have heard of, is Skolkovo, and it basically is an organization that helps Russian entrepreneurs bring their products to market. And I think there was an acceptance that despite all the sort of scientific firepower that Russia has, what it lacks is experience and sophistication in bringing those products to market. And hence it set up organizations like Skolkovo to look at best practice around the world, tap into the West's know-how there, and UK is very much up there in that regard to help Russian companies, as I say, bring stuff to market, bring their products to market. That's just Skolkovo's main campus in Moscow. And they have a similar one about 2 hours east of Moscow in Kazan, which is the capital of one of the regions called Kazakhstan. Sorry, not Kazakhstan. Kazan is the capital of Tatarstan. Apologies. Okay, what goods do well? This is what UK has done particularly well, exporting to Russia. Machinery and transport equipment. I've mentioned JCB. Obviously, they fall into one of those categories. Chemicals, manufactured goods, materials, and then food and livestock. Obviously, all other products are represented as well, but those are particularly noteworthy. And then services, no surprises there. Financial services account for about 50% of the services we export. And we work very closely with an organization I'm sure most of you will know, City UK, which is essentially a chamber of commerce which focuses on the city and financial industry. And they have lots of programs running in Russia with a central bank and other financial institutions. Travel, obviously, an interesting area, and again, represented in our membership. We have quite a few British tour companies who do particularly well here, and then telecoms and government. Okay, I'm sure any of you who have exported to a foreign market or exported abroad know that there are challenges, and Russia's no different in that respect. Every country, it just by the mere fact that they're from a different culture and have different background means they do things differently. And one of the things people talk about is red tape, and it is quite bureaucratic. And I think that can come as a shock to you as a British company. Things that we haven't done for a long time, sort of company stamps, etc. Signing documents physically rather than electronically are a slight cultural adjustment you will have to make. Language barrier, of course, whenever you're exporting abroad, you have language issues. Although I have to say in Moscow, certainly, a lot of the business language is English, and most business people will speak a certain amount of Russian. If you start traveling out to the regions, that changes quite quickly. But then again, a function of a very good educational system, there are plenty of very good quality interpreters that can be hired at reasonable prices to help. Business culture, again, everyone's business culture differs. I think Russians view us as overly polite, and they sort of are vaguely amused by the amount of times we say excuse me or sorry. Russians are much more direct, which actually in many ways makes business negotiations easier. Of course, I've mentioned many times how big the country is, that moving products across a country of that size involves costs. And then like anywhere, market entry costs are something that have to be factored in, due diligence, and just making, just really sounding out your partners. I don't know if it's a cliche, but everyone talks about trust being foundation of business. I think it's particularly true in Russia. I think that recent history has been quite sort of a bit of a roller coaster, and the relationships that you actually take time to invest in are the ones that endure. And it's been quite interesting being a Brit out in Russia during this, whereas I was in the UK at the startup of the COVID-19 crisis, and there was a real sense of, oh my God, the world's falling apart. Whereas when I came out to Russia for the sort of the second bit of it, that's a much more sort of pragmatic. We've seen this sort of thing before. It's another road bump. We'll get over this. So I think if the message is, don't come to Russia thinking it's just a quick sort of a quick business deal. Any business relationship takes time, and you need to spend the time to invest in it, but then it does reap the rewards. Just a little fact. If I told, the World Bank produces Ease of Doing Business Index, very well respected. And in 2019, if I told you France was placed 32nd, Spain 30th, I'd ask you where Russia was. And I usually get the answer, far down the list. In fact, Russia was placed 28th in 2019. And it's been a real focus of the government has been to improve the business environment in Russia over the last few years. In 2014, it was 92nd, which gives you some idea of the progress they've made over the last few years. It is an index. You can look into the methodology. Nothing is perfect, and in this particular methodology doesn't include corruption, for instance, but it is well respected and gives you an idea, as I said, of the strides the Russian government has made over the last few years. Okay, I won't labor this one. This is just a breakdown of our membership, and I put it up there really to give you an idea of the companies or the sectors that are involved with Russia, really just sort of putting a little bit of meat on the bones that I've already talked about. So that's UK members looking, and that's a mix of obviously UK members looking at Russia and also Russian companies in the UK. And then same detail for Russia. It tend to be more the UK companies in Russia. So you'll see pretty much every sector represented. Okay, this is just my thoughts really on future trends. In the way that Russia looks at, I suppose, Germany for the car industry, it very much looks at UK for education. There's huge amounts of Russian kids being educated in the UK, and it's an area that they're genuinely interested in. And when we do our various visits to the regions, it's something we try and promote, which we don't promote, we do promote, and it's an area, it's a sector that we always get a lot of interest and a lot of engagement. Smart city technology, huge interest in various cities in Russia, no more so than in the capital here in Moscow. We've done various projects with them, encouraging exchange of ideas, but with the underlying intent of encouraging businesses to do business together on it. And then related to a certain extent is digital health. Again, you know, we have, everyone's been talking about the NHS. It is an amazing institution, and we have a lot to be proud of, and actually a lot to actually talk to other countries about, and it's a hook we very much use when we go around the various regions in Russia. And then of course, in a way that doesn't happen so much in the UK, you have a lot of very big corporations like Gazprom, or that's just one of the more obvious ones, which actually run their own medical institutions. So actually, it's a very promising area for specialist UK health companies to get involved in. Finally, before I hand over very quickly to a colleague, I'd just like to say who can help. Well, there's, as I mentioned before, lots and lots of people. Apart from the obvious, us, you have the embassy in both Moscow and London who are promoting each other's countries. DIT, Department of International Trade, of course, the consulates, many trade associations who can help you. And then the myriad of market experts and consultants who specialize in Russia. Just the internet, if you just have a look on that, you get an idea of the number of companies involved in Russia. Good. I'd just like to finish there. And if I may, we're in a very fortunate position in that in our London office, we have the Russian Federation Chamber of Commerce and Industries UK representative co-located with us. And there, I suppose, the British Chamber of Commerce Russian equivalent, they have representatives around the world. Sergei Averin is one of those. And the fantastic thing for us is he gives us immediate reach back to all the 80 or so chambers of commerce in Russia. So when we have a UK company asking us that they want to be hooked up with a particular company in a particular region, Sergei is our go-to man, and he uses his network to put the company in contact with the right people. So if you don't mind, Rob, I'll just ask Sergei to say a couple of words, and then we'll go to questions if that works for you.
Absolutely fine. Thank you, Al. Thank you.
Right, thanks. Sergei, over to you.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Rob. Just a few words about my organizations. I'm the UK representative, as Al mentioned, of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of the Russian Federation, or as we call it, RFCCI in short. We are the biggest non-governmental, non-profit, member-based business organization in Russia. The RFCCI is often mistakenly associated with Russian governmental structures, which is not quite right, such as the Ministry of Economic Development or Embassy of Russia, Trade Delegation of the Russian Federation, or sometimes with our lovely RBCC, the Russo-British Chamber of Commerce. CCI of Russia is an umbrella organization for Russian regional chambers of commerce. And at this point, as Al said, we are quite similar and can be compared to the BCC, the British Chambers of Commerce, or also my territory is the Chambers of Ireland. The difference is that we unite 180 chambers, 3 times the amount of the BCC. Altogether, we promote the businesses of more than 50,000 member companies, large, medium, and small enterprises from all over Russia. There are 800 different committees and business councils working for the chamber, such as Agriculture or Textile Industry Committee, or the Committee for Logistics and Tourism. Main sources of my organization are membership fees, our activities in promoting companies, events, and income from more than 30 daughter companies, such as the Exhibition Center, which is located in the center of Moscow, or the World Trade Center, Moscow, or the International Commercial Arbitration Court, the oldest institute to solve commercial disputes between foreign companies in Russia. We have 11 representatives worldwide, and depending on the countries, let's say in China, we have 2 offices, because volume, trade volume between our countries is very high. In conclusion, just how we, the network of chambers of commerce can help you to do business in Russia. As I said, the network consists of 180 regional chambers of commerce representing more than 50,000 member companies, mostly SMEs, all over the Russian Federation. It means that we can help you to find a reliable partner from any part of Russia, exercise due diligence, and we can also assist you in promoting your goods through the RFCCI's exhibition network, organize business missions, or your meetings at the Congress centers in Moscow, let's say, or other cities. In regards to Russia, it's fair to say that there are, of course, some challenges. However, I truly believe that they can be overcome. The press coverage of the current situation is vastly over-exaggerated, that's the thing. I've heard people saying that there is an embargo on Russian trade. This is not true. There are Western sanctions and Russian anti-sanctions, and they can cover only several sectors, such as financial, oil, gas, and few others. And even these are not limitless. Financial sector sanctions cover only state banks and organizations. Oil and gas sanctions restrict only offshore operations. So speak to us, speak to specialists, and do not place too much reliance on the uninformed media sources and media reports. And just a few words about where to start and who can help you to do business in Russia. Firstly, and most importantly, you need to find the right partner in Russia. We can help you to do this. Learn the language. It is not funny, but yeah, Russian language is very difficult. But for example, you can learn the Russian alphabet while traveling on board a plane to Russia. And believe me, these will help you to create better relationship. Establish a relationship. In Russia, it is a must. So go to a restaurant, drink some vodka, go to sauna or banya with your Russian partners. These are elements of Russian business culture. Contracts. I'm a lawyer by my educational background and can speak a lot about this, but most importantly, do check both sides of a contract. Russian and English texts have to be the same. You don't have to use Russian law as the governing law. You may use English or other law. Don't put state litigation as the dispute solving mechanism. Its decision would not be enforceable outside Russia. Instead, you may put Moscow International Commercial Arbitration Court, which I mentioned, or London arbitration, or even Chinese Arbitration Commission. Please do consult with the Department of Foreign Trade. They can give you free advice. Consult with us, consult with RBCC and its members. Talk to other British companies who have already been doing business in Russia. Let them share their experience, even they are not in the same market as you are. And of course, you're very welcome to do business in Russia. Don't wait while others are doing. Your cousins from Germany, Italians, French. We have very nice relations and huge volume with Germany. And we have huge representatives at the office in Berlin. So you're very welcome to do business, and we are here to help you with this. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Alf. Thank you, Sergey. That's very insightful presentation. I mean, it's just amazing. I think the more webinars and the more that we try and raise awareness and dispel some of these urban myths that do surround Russia and Moscow. I must admit, I wasn't aware that Russia was ranked easier to do business in than Spain or France, but having dealt with the French many times, I'm not overly surprised.
Yes,
So thank you very much for that. Just before we throw it open to the floor for any questions that Alf and I'm sure Sergey would be happy to answer, we do have a question that's come in from Natalia. Alf, have you seen that on the chat?
I haven't. Let me have a look.
I haven't. It's okay. Natalia, would you like to unmute yourself and just ask your question of Alf?
Yes, with pleasure. Are you hear me?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. I am CFO Moglina says. It's the western part of Russia. We are 40 kilometers from Estonian borders, Eurozone. I have got my graduation in New Zealand and came here last year to promote my zone and set up the project in manufacturing, any manufacturing in ready infrastructure. So Moglina today, it's 300 hectare land plots, absolutely ready for deployment any industry, any manufacturer, as we have a gas, water supply, electricity, everything ready. But what's more, we have an incentive program such as 10-year holidays, tax regional. So you are free from custom, from income taxes, from car tax, any taxes. So this 10-year as a break. What's more, we have our governor, Sportman, he's our supervisor, and his name Mikhail Vedерников. So in the context of regional government guarantee, he also so his contribution to promote Moglina says. However, we are business entity, but absolutely the same business rule as you, actually, because I have a 1-year experience in New Zealand and Australian investment company. So I think might be some switch our mindset is the main obstacle. No, we are eager to invite you. You have an opportunity to have a road in our Pskov region. So I appreciate if you send me your mail, and I will give you back presentation, Moglina says. Thank you very much.
Thank you, yeah.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Thank you.
Yeah.
Alf, do you want to make any comments?
Just very quickly. Yeah, thank you, Natalia. We are very aware of the special economic zones, and indeed, we have promoted several. Just before the coronavirus hit, we were talking to Kaliningrad, who have a special economic zone.
Oh, okay.
We've
Amber, yes.
Yes, yeah.
I worked there also.
Okay, yeah, and Tatarstan in some detail. And in fact, I missed where you said, did you say Pskov, did you?
Pskov, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so we know the...
from St. Petersburg.
Yeah, yes, I know. We know the Chamber of Commerce there very well. I forgot his name. Very, very nice man, and it's something we've been aspiring to do for some time. But unfortunately, the COVID thing at the moment has gotten in the way. But let's exchange details, and we can certainly look to do something once the restrictions lift.
Oh,
but thank you.
Got it.
Thanks, Alf, and again, thank you, Natalia. Alf, just before we go to the rest of the panel, just interesting, I know that you do run an awful lot of trade missions out to Russia from the UK. Obviously, COVID-19 situations put a stop to that. Do you have any plan for later in the year when hopefully things will get back to some sort of semblance of normality?
I'm not sure. We were planning one to Tyumen, which is oil region of Russia. But like so many of the oil regions, they are looking to diversify the economies. So very interesting areas for other sectors as well. So that had been planned for September. To be honest, I'm not sure. Status unknown at the moment is all I can say. We'd love it to go ahead, but in a way, we've missed the sort of lead-in. We always talk about sort of within our own organization about a 4-month lead-in time. So I think, unfortunately, we probably missed the boat for it this year, but as soon as we can, we will start reviving them again.
Thanks, Alf. We've had another question come in from, is it Toyin? Toyin, would you like to unmute yourself and give us a shout?
I can see it, the one on food and agriculture.
On GMO, yeah.
It's not an area I'm an expert in. However, I do know there was a very big UK delegation out to Russia in, I think, the end of January. So there's a lot. I mean, obviously, there's a huge amount of opportunity in Russia with all the agricultural land. A lot of the big institutions invest in it. So it's obviously an investment opportunity as well. And I think what areas that have done very well are on animal husbandry in particular. And unfortunately, I think we as the UK have been slightly slow on getting board this, because I know the Irish with their expertise have done very well in this area. And it's an area Sergey, my colleague who you've just heard from, and I are very keen to encourage UK businesses to get involved in. But yeah, I mean, they are, but there's always room for more.
Thank you. I think we have maybe time for just one more question before we go to a close at 1 o'clock. Has anybody got any questions? Please unmute yourself, and I'm sure Alfons or Sergey will be happy to answer.
Rob, could I say, I don't know if it will help, but and take Nick Grills by surprise, but he runs JCB in Russia. He's done business there. It might be interesting just to hear 1 minute from him, if that's okay.
I would be delighted to. Nick, I have to ask: Are you in Russia, or are you somewhere close to Staffordshire at the moment?
Thank you, Al. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I am. Unfortunately, I'm sat in my house in Staffordshire at the moment, rather than my office in Moscow.
Please don't say unfortunately.
Well, no, I do feel slightly disconnected. I guess the only slight silver lining is that the rest of the team are also sat in their apartments in Moscow rather than doing business. I was just going to say, obviously, JCB, very proud Staffordshire business. We've been in Russia now selling machinery off and on for 30 years. We import our machinery, and we have a small manufacturing facility. So we are reliant on dealers to sell our machinery, and they're all Russian businesses. So we have 2 distribution networks. One is for agriculture and one for construction, but they're all Russian businesses employing Russian people who are familiar with the Russian customer base. The reason that JCB is is in Russia, and whilst it's a very, very important market for JCB, is clearly it's a country that is going to develop a lot from where it is today, particularly on infrastructure and construction of services, buildings, roads, and clearly that's very important for our machinery. And then the other side of our business, which is agriculture, you know, the agricultural land mass already is large, and there is a lot more land that will be turned for agricultural production in the future. And we're lucky that British engineered equipment is perceived as very high quality by the Russian customer base. You have a very interesting construction and agricultural machinery market, which is imported equipment, and then you have the locally made equipment, and then you have the Chinese imports as well. And it's very clear in where it sits from a price point in the market, and British equipment, our equipment fetches a premium because it's seen as a premium engineered quality product, which is good for us. As Alf did refer to, clearly the regulation is different in Russia. We rely on Russians and specialists, you know, the accountants, the legal firms to guide us around that. It is very different to doing business in the UK, particularly the regulation and the paperwork. And the key thing for us that Alf referred to earlier going forward is, you know, the Russians, you know, they want companies to come here and build. We have a small manufacturing facility today. We're likely to invest, make that larger, because localization, you know, they want foreign companies to come invest and grow the supplier base within Russia, use Russian expertise, and get to a point that we can then produce and then export outside of Russia. And that is a process that we've been looking at for a while, and we're going through at the moment as a business.
Great, thanks very much, Nick. Really appreciate that. And it's great as well. You know, we do a lot of work with the JCB. In fact, JCB are one of the patrons at Stafford Chambers, and we're very, very proud to have them as a fundamental part of our Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much. There is one question that's outstanding from, I think it's Catherine Henson, but I believe that might actually be a Malcolm Henson. So this is the last question we'll take. Sergey or Alf, are you okay to get back to that one? The question is, sorry. Sorry guys, it's here somewhere. I'm hoping to trade in Russia remotely. Alf, Sergey, could you give just a couple of nuggets of information to Malcolm Henson?
Sergey, do you want to go?
Yeah,
I've spoken enough.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your question, Malcolm. I would advise still just to have physical connections first, because in Russia, you are to be present in Russia. And that's like a general model of doing business in Russia. When you are in there, when you establish this contact, you speak directly with that, with your partner, either signing contracts or without it, but definitely you first to establish personal connection, which then will help you to do that business. And if you're asking about means of electronic and all of these internet devices, that you may be sure that Russia itself, Russian communication and Russian staff is ready to do this. That's easy. And the electronic trade in Russia is booming now. Let's say today, just today, I ordered food to my mom, which is in Moscow and Moscow suburbs, and it was delivered like within 2 hours. I can't get it here in London. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sergey. Ladies and gentlemen, we've run out of time. It's amazing where an hour goes by. We've barely scratched the surface on trading with Russia. But can I just say a massive, massive thank you for Alf and to Sergey for agreeing to do this with Stafford Chambers of Commerce. And hopefully, Alf, if it's okay, we can get a copy of the recording off you, and we'll certainly upload it to our webinar library with some of the other countries that we're doing. Thanks ever so much again. And again, Nick, thanks ever so much for your contribution from JCB. Great to hear from you, and great that JCB is still doing so well over in Russia. Can I just wish you, Alf, Sergey, unless there's anything you want to add?
No, thanks very much. It's been a great pleasure. Always enjoyed doing joint stuff with Staffordshire, and we'll look forward to hopefully bring a Russian delegation to you one day.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody. Take care now.
Thank you. Bye.